Okay, hello, I'm Josh, and this is Jess, and we're gonna be doing a mock CBT therapy session today. And just to be very clear, in case this wasn't obvious to everyone watching, that this is a simulated therapy session. This is a simulated therapy session, and also we have a sleeping baby, and so we're gonna speak softly. Because if she wakes up, then we will all be very miserable. Um, this is Jess's second therapy session, and we're treating her for alcohol misuse. Okay, Jessica, it's really good to see you again. It's been about a week since our last therapy session, so I'm sure that a lot has changed, and we're only just getting to know each other as it is, and so um, I just wanted to ask you to kick things off. How has your last week been?
Yeah, it's been really stressful. My kid's been sick. It's been stressful at work. The house is getting cluttered. It's been really stressful.
It sounds like a rough week.
Definitely.
Um, will you say, like, how have you been managing the stress? Like, have you been doing anything in particular to cope with that, or has it just been like, how have you made it? How have you made it through so far?
Yeah, it's been pretty miserable. Usually I use alcohol to cope, and it has always made things better. I guess the reason I'm here is to not do that. So, I mean, I really tried this week to not, but I don't know how I'm going to get away from it because it always makes it's a break. Yeah, it gives me a vacation for a little bit.
Hmm. I definitely get that, and I think especially since it's been a coping strategy for you for so long now. How many is it? I believe you said last week that you've been sober for about a month, just under a month. Was that correct?
Sure.
Um, um, and I'm glad that you talked a little bit about that, because I know that it's difficult, um, but this is something that I've been wanting to talk to you about a little bit about, especially as it relates to cognitive behavioral therapy. Um, that that sentence you said about alcohol always makes things better, or it has always made things better. Those statements like that, and especially when they're held as beliefs, can have a big impact on our behavior. And I think it's important to recognize that if you're able to, like, having those beliefs is normal. And I think that it's not, I mean, it's perfectly, it's expected that thoughts like that are going to arise. But when they do, it's also really important to challenge them, because oftentimes when you do, you realize that the beliefs that we have that are driving so much of our behavior are not actually true. And so, if you don't mind, like, let's just play that tape through. You've been dealing with a lot. You've got a ton of stress that you're attempting to cope with. Um, let's just say you end up relapsing and you use alcohol again. How does that help with the stress?
It always helps right away, but yeah, I always in the long run, I hate myself.
Hmm.
So it's always tempting because it's instant gratification. It always helps. I don't know if I'll ever be able to cope without alcohol sometimes.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, and hopefully, I think I made this clear, but I think it's really reasonable to have the beliefs, but also realizing that, like, we're not in control of our thoughts and our emotions, and so when we are dealing with a lot of stress and we have a craving, and that leads to thoughts like, I always have used alcohol in the past and alcohol is going to help me cope with this, if we get used to challenging them and thinking, oh, you're right, when I use alcohol, I might feel better right now, but in the long run, it ends up making things a lot harder for me. That's when we start to realize, like, oh, okay, this thought I have or this belief I have is not, it's not actually rational because it's just not true. Similarly, you just said another statement that I would like to do something very similar with, just kind of focus on it, is your statement that you don't think that you'll ever be able to cope without alcohol. It's similar to the last one that we talked about, but it's also a little bit deeper. And I think that if we challenge it and we investigate that a little bit, we'll find that that's also not all that true either. So I like one way we could do this is to think of times in the past. Like, you haven't always used alcohol, have you?
Mm-mm.
There have been some times in your past where you've been sober.
Mm-hmm.
And how were you able to cope with stress during those times? Because I would imagine, like, maybe you weren't quite so stressed, but we always have stress in our lives, and you were undoubtedly stressed at that time.
Yeah, I mean, there have been a few different things I've been able to do, but one of them that helped for a while was when I had made time to exercise. That really helped me, like, be able to clear my head a bit and, like, take a breather between, like, the height of my stress. I guess, like, yeah, if I was able to exercise a little bit, then I'd feel better and didn't feel like I had to have a drink.
So you see that, like, the statement of, I don't think I'll ever be able to cope without alcohol, like, it's not only is it not true necessarily for the future, but it hasn't been true in the past. And so I think it's just important to recognize that even though it feels like you're not going to be able to cope, especially right now, just under a month sober, it feels like you're not going to be able to cope moving forward. But I think it's important to recognize that you do all the time. You thought of one time in the past when you were sober for a stretch of time, but there are also times throughout your life, even tomorrow, where you're going to go through something stressful and you manage it. And you don't always have cravings, or you don't always have to turn to alcohol in order to cope with that stress. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, it gives me some food for thought.
Let's talk a little bit more about things that you've been dealing with.
Okay, what specifically would you like to talk about?
I think I'd like to focus on more of these core beliefs. We've gone over a couple already, and I think it's helpful to review so that we recognize that these things that we believe are oftentimes not true, and yet they're impacting so much of the behavior so much of our behavior, and then that influences our relationships, and it makes us feel like we're sort of out of control of our lives.
Yeah, actually, that's spot on. It's really hard because I do feel really embarrassed that I'm even in this predicament to begin with. I feel like when people look at me, they see me as this, like, person that can't control myself, or, like, weak. I don't know. Like they can't trust me. So it's been hard trying to deal with the stress by not drinking, but also, like, managing those thoughts of how people perceive me.
That's another thing that's really common. I think that similarly to the beliefs that you had about your ability to cope with with stress without using alcohol. Um, Often the beliefs that we have in regard to like who we are and whether we're trustworthy or not based on that behavior, or like in thinking that other people are thinking that about us, um, those types of beliefs are also ones that we need to challenge because they're also not true. And I think one way to, and I've said a couple things that sort of relate to this, but when we're living our lives and we encounter something that gives us stress, we're going to have various thoughts and emotions arise, and those things are going to have an impact on our behavior unless we're able to investigate them and realize that we're not actually our thoughts or our emotions. We don't have control over those things, so we can't be defined by them, and also the behaviors that come as a result of them, they don't necessarily define who we are as people. And so internalizing that belief can be really detrimental to your sobriety in the long run, because it can lead to shame, which then only perpetuates use and feelings like this. And so even though you think people might be thinking those things about you, recognizing that most of the time they're going to be our own beliefs that we're projecting onto other people, and those beliefs just aren't true either. So I think that it's been a very short session. We don't have a ton of time, so we'll wrap up. But I think that was a really good introduction into cognitive behavioral therapy and some of the techniques that we can use to challenge our beliefs that we have and these thoughts that arise. And I just want to reinforce that, like, I appreciate, like, this is only our second session. I really appreciate you being vulnerable and opening up to me about this stuff, because I know that's not easy. And I would just like to challenge you at the end, or to close, to try and use this stuff when you start having thoughts that are coming up that are not true, but you know that are sort of leading you down the path that you've always been down, and like having to do with the ways you've always coped with stress. Like, challenge those beliefs, and I'd like to hear how your experience went next week when we meet. Does that sound reasonable?
For sure. It's something good to think about.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.